February 15th, 1945, 11 a.m. The jungle perimeter, Rabaul, New Britain. The heat is a physical weight, pressing down on the canopy with a suffocating, wet intensity. It smells of rotting vegetation, dysentery, and unburied dead. Inside a waterlogged dugout, Lieutenant Commander Otani of the Imperial Japanese Navy stares at his lunch. It is a pathetic ration, a handful of weevil-infested rice, a few boiled lizards caught near the latrine, and a cup of muddy water. He eats it slowly, ceremoniously, because he knows there will be no dinner. Around him, the once mighty garrison of Rabaul, 100,000 strong, is slowly rotting alive. They have been bypassed by the Americans, cut off. Their supply lines were severed months ago by U.S. submarines. They are eating roots. They are eating leather belts. Some are whispering about eating the dead. But they hold on. They hold on because of Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit. They believe that their suffering is noble. They believe that the Americans, soft and undisciplined, cannot endure this kind of hell. They convince themselves that the enemy is just as miserable as they are, struggling to ship bullets and beans across 4,000 miles of hostile ocean. But 400 miles away, at the Ulithi Atoll, the Americans are doing something that defies every law of warfare, logic, and scarcity. The U.S. Navy has assembled the greatest armada in human history. Aircraft carriers stretch to the horizon. Battleships bristle with 16-inch guns. But tucked away in the center of this fleet, bobbing sluggishly in the gentle swell, sits a vessel that looks like a floating concrete shoebox. It has no guns, it has no armor, it has no engine. It has to be towed into battle like a massive gray brick. Its official designation is the BRL, Barge, Refrigerated, Large. To the naked eye, it is the ugliest ship in the Pacific, but to the sailors sweating on the decks of the destroyers and cruisers, it is the most beautiful thing afloat. Because inside that concrete hull, the temperature is a crisp, impossible 10 degrees below zero. The BRL is not carrying ammunition. It is not carrying aviation fuel. It is a floating factory dedicated to a single tactical purpose, the mass production of ice cream. While Lieutenant Commander Otani scrapes the last grain of rice from his bowl in Rabaul, trying to ignore the hunger cramps clawing at his stomach, American engineers on the BRL are flipping the switch on a massive General Electric freezer system. The generators hum to life, burning precious diesel fuel, enough to power a tank battalion just to spin the mixing blades. The numbers are staggering. This concrete barge produces 500 gallons of ice cream every shift, vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. It is a logistical flex of terrifying proportions. For the American sailor, this is a taste of home, a morale booster that keeps them fighting. But for the Japanese officers who are about to discover its existence, it is something else entirely. It is a message written in sugar and cream that says we have so much we can afford to waste it. The Japanese soldier is told that the American supply line is stretched thin. He is told that one more push will break the enemy's will. But how do you break the will of an enemy who can float a desert factory across the Pacific just to serve dessert?
To understand why the United States Navy would spend millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours to float a concrete freezer into a war zone, you have to understand the unique psychology of the American military machine in 1945. In 1914, Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels had issued General Order 99, famously banning alcohol aboard U.S. naval vessels. By World War II, the British Royal Navy was still issuing a daily ration of rum to its sailors. The French had wine. The Germans had beer. The Americans? They had soda fountains. When the war started, the Pentagon realized they had a problem. They were asking 18-year-old boys to endure kamikaze attacks, typhoons, and the psychological grinder of endless ocean patrols without the traditional sedative of alcohol. They needed a substitute. They needed a vice that was wholesome, caloric, and distinctly American. They chose ice cream. In 1942, Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal didn't just suggest it, he prioritized it. He declared that ice cream was, quote, paramount to morale. Suddenly, the production of frozen dairy became a matter of national security. Out in the Pacific, this directive turned into a bizarre obsession. Ice cream became the unofficial currency of the fleet. It was more valuable than gold. It was more liquid than cash. If a destroyer rescued a downed aircraft carrier pilot from the ocean, the standard ransom demanded by the destroyer captain for the pilot's return was 20 gallons of strawberry ripple. It was a fixed exchange rate. 1 human life equals 20 gallons of strawberry ripple. But the demand was outpacing the supply. The standard galleys on the smaller ships couldn't keep up. The destroyers and destroyer escorts, the tin cans protecting the fleet, didn't have the freezer space. So the Army Transportation Corps was tasked with the impossible. They designed the BRL. It was a monstrosity of engineering. Because steel was needed for tanks and carriers, the hull was built of concrete, a massive floating stone. Inside, it was a maze of chrome pipes, ammonia compressors, and storage vats. It didn't just make ice cream, it was a floating 7-Eleven. It could store 1,500 tons of meat and 500 tons of fresh vegetables. It was a logistical flex that bordered on arrogance. While the BRL churned out its daily quota at Ulithi, the Japanese Navy was operating in a different universe. Across the water, the Imperial Japanese Navy had been reduced to the Tokyo Express. They were using their sleek, dangerous destroyers not for combat, but for grocery runs. Under the cover of darkness, Japanese warships would race toward islands like Guadalcanal or New Guinea, terrified of American air power. They wouldn't even stop. They would simply slow down, shove steel drums filled with rice off the deck, and speed away, hoping the drums would float to the starving infantry on the beach. Often, the soldiers were too weak to swim out to get them. The contrast was absolute. The Japanese were sacrificing their finest warships just to deliver uncooked rice to dying men. The Americans were building specialized concrete ships just to deliver dessert to living ones. This disparity didn't stay a secret for long. In the intelligence game, trash tells a story. American ships dumped their garbage overboard, and as the currents carried the refuse of the U.S. fleet toward the Japanese-held islands, Japanese intelligence officers began to find things washing up in the surf. They found wrappers. They found unfinished tins of Spam. They found fresh orange peels. And in the interrogation rooms, Japanese prisoners captured in the Philippines began to tell stories that their captors found hard to believe. They spoke of the ice cream ship. At first, the High Command dismissed it. It sounded like propaganda. A concrete ship that made ice cream? It was absurd. It was a fairy tale designed to break their spirit. But then, a Japanese colonel on a bypassed island looked through his binoculars at a captured supply depot and saw something that shattered his worldview. He didn't see ammo crates. He didn't see fuel drums. He saw a refrigerated landing craft unloading a freezer.
June 1944. The skies over Peleliu. While the concrete barge churned out gallons of vanilla in the rear, the ingenuity of the American soldier at the front line turned into something almost mocking. Squadron Commander J. Hunter Reinberg of the U.S. Marines is sitting on a blistering airfield, looking at his F-4U Corsair. It is 100 degrees in the shade. The humidity is so high that mold grows on boots overnight. The water in the canteens is hot enough to brew tea. Reinberg doesn't want hot water. He wants chocolate ice cream. He doesn't have a concrete barge, but he does have a 2,000 horsepower fighter plane and a fundamental understanding of physics. He calls his maintenance crew over. They take a drop tank, an aluminum pod designed to carry spare aviation fuel, and cut a large hole in the top. They scour the mess tent for canned milk and cocoa powder. They pour the mixture into the tank, rig a small propeller to the front to act as a mixing blade, and strap it to the underside of the Corsair. Reinberg takes off. He climbs to 33,000 feet. Up there, the air is 30 degrees below zero. For 45 minutes, Reinberg flies a combat patrol that is nothing more than a grocery run in the stratosphere. The vibration of the Pratt & Whitney engine shakes the mixture. The slipstream spins the propeller. The freezing altitude does the rest. When he lands, the tank is covered in frost. The crew rushes out with mess kits. They crack open the pod. It's slushy, but it's ice cream. They refine the recipe. They realize they need to fly slower and loop more to get the texture right. They are perfecting a dessert recipe while flying over enemy territory. Now, shift your perspective. Look at this through the eyes of a Japanese anti-aircraft gunner on the ground below. You are watching American planes loiter overhead. You assume they are spotting for artillery. You assume they are preparing to drop napalm. You are terrified, clutching your Arisaka rifle, praying to your ancestors. You have no idea that the man circling above you isn't trying to kill you. He is just trying to get his chocolate ripple to set properly. This is the ultimate insult. The Americans aren't just winning, they are bored. The psychological weight of this disparity begins to crack the resolve of the Japanese officer corps. Diaries recovered from caves on Peleliu and Iwo Jima reveal a shift in tone. In 1942, the entries are full of fire and samurai spirit. By 1944, they are filled with a bewildered awe at the enemy's trash. One captured Japanese intelligence officer, interrogated after the war, recounted the moment his belief in victory died. It wasn't when he saw the atomic bomb. It wasn't when the Yamato sank. It was when he interrogated an American POW who complained that the vanilla ice cream on his battleship was too grainy. The Japanese officer looked at the starving, emaciated men of his own unit, men who would have killed their own brothers for a bowl of rice, and then looked at the well-fed American complaining about the texture of his frozen treats. He realized then that the propaganda was a lie. The Americans weren't soft. They were the masters of matter. They had conquered the one enemy the Japanese army could not defeat: logistics. The war was no longer a contest of warriors. It was a collision between a medieval mindset and an industrial god. And the god had a sweet tooth.
April 1945. Ulithi Atoll. The Ulithi Lagoon is the Grand Central Station of the Pacific War. It is a vast, turquoise parking lot filled with the lethal power of the U.S. Third Fleet. It is here that the BRL, the concrete ice cream barge, is finally towed into position. It floats anonymously among the carriers and battleships, a gray slab in a sea of gray steel. But as soon as it drops anchor, the radio waves come alive, requesting permission to come alongside for transfer of frozen cargo. From every corner of the anchorage, small boats, launches, pinnaces, whaleboats swarm toward the barge like bees to a hive. They aren't coming for ammo, they're coming for the gidunk, Navy slang for sweets. Inside the barge, the scene is surreal. It looks less like a ship and more like a Detroit assembly line. American soldiers in white paper hats and aprons stand over stainless steel vats, churning out gallon after gallon.
The air is frigid, a shocking contrast to the tropical heat outside. They are producing enough ice cream to feed 1 million men. But the BRL is more than just a factory. It is a symbol of total American dominance. Consider the resource allocation. At this very moment, in Germany, the Third Reich is collapsing because they lack the fuel to put tanks on the road. In Japan, the civilian population is boiling pine roots to extract oil because there is no gasoline left for the fishing fleet. And yet, here sits the United States Navy, burning diesel fuel to freeze milk. It is a display of excess that borders on the obscene, but it is also a brilliant strategic weapon. When a Japanese submarine commander surfaces his boat at night to recharge batteries, he sees the glow of the U.S. fleet on the horizon. He knows that over there, the enemy is watching movies. They are drinking cold Coca-Cola. They are eating ice cream. He looks at his own crew. They are filthy, suffering from scurvy, and living in a tin can that smells of unwashed bodies and diesel fumes. He knows that even if he sinks a carrier tomorrow, another one will take its place next week, and the new one will have a soda fountain too. The BRL didn't fire a single shot in World War II. It didn't sink a ship, it didn't shoot down a plane, but it destroyed the enemy's hope. It proved that the United States could fight a global war on 2 fronts and still have enough spare capacity to worry about dessert. It proved that the American supply chain was unbreakable. As the war entered its final bloody phase, the Japanese resorted to kamikaze, the divine wind. They turned their men into guided missiles, sacrificing flesh because they had run out of steel. It was the ultimate act of desperation. Meanwhile, on the concrete deck of the BRL, a 19-year-old kid from Kansas was scraping the bottom of a mixing vat, worried not about dying for the emperor, but about whether they had enough chocolate syrup for the Sunday ration. The contrast was the story of the war. One side was fighting for death, the other was fighting for a slice of the good life. And in the end, the good life won.